What exactly did spies do for the revolution? Well, to quote a defeated British officer, Major George Beckwith, at the end of the battle, Washington did not really outfight the British, he simply outspied us. Needless to say, the work of spies in the American Revolution was quite impactful upon the outcome of the war. During the war, Washington amassed a number of spies in order to counteract British intelligence. This decision would end up tilting the scales in America's favour. In this video, I would like to view both sides of the coin and talk on a few famous spies of the Revolution, both of America and Great Britain, and their contributions to the Revolution.
Nathan Hale was a strong young man from a well-respected farming family in New England. Whenever the time came for war, he dropped his beloved job as a schoolteacher and headed for the front lines. Hale joined Connecticut's militia in the late summer of 1775 and was made a captain in a matter of months, proving to be an effective, benevolent leader over his battalion. After the disastrous failure at the Battle of Brooklyn, General Washington decided to create an intelligence unit to gain an advantage over the British. It was at this point that Washington's trusted scout would come to recruit Hale to become part of this new unit, earning him the title of Ranger. It wasn't long before Washington called the Rangers forth to perform their first mission. He needed an inside scoop on the incoming British naval warships into Manhattan, transporting the same army that had demolished the Continentals in the Battle of Brooklyn. Washington's army was far too scarce to defend the entirety of Manhattan's coast. He needed to know the time and place of arrival to ambush the British fleet before it was too late. However, being a spy in the 18th century was rather dirty business. One could not trust a spy, as it is in their duty to deceive and betray one's trust. Anyone caught performing spy work was hung by the neck until dead, and nearly all of the Rangers refused Washington's order except for one, though considered the worst candidate for spyware on account of his open, honest nature and easily recognizable profile. Captain Hale stepped up to the challenge, and so he was left to embark alone on this mission. Valiantly, he crept across British lines. He never made it in time, as the British invaded Manhattan on September 15th and seized New York City. It was not long after his departure that he was caught by the British near Long Island. Though he knew his mission had failed, he still pressed on in his spy endeavors. He was given the opportunity to spare himself if he switched sides in favor of Britain. Though Hale knew that the Continental Army had a bleak future in the Revolution, he still refused such a dishonorable act. On the early Sunday morning, in late September of 1776, Hale was scheduled to hang from the gallows. But still he stood fearlessly with a noose tied around his neck. Before he was killed, he even gave the British soldiers a sermon on their impiety to God. The final words he delivered before his execution have surpassed the heavy weight of time and still resonate with Americans to this day. I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country.
Not long after the execution of Nathan Hale came a newer, more discreet group of intelligence. Led by Major Benjamin Talmadge, it was dubbed the Culper Spy Ring, named after a town George Washington had surveyed in his home state of Virginia. The Culper Ring consisted of trusted, close-knit individuals hailing from Long Island, New York. Their job was to retrieve as much information as possible in the British-controlled Setor Kit and deliver to Boston in aid of the Continental Army. This group may have been small, but they are to thank for collecting many key British plans to try and seize the remaining New England colonies. They also had been the ones to discover Benedict Arnold's treacherous plans with John Andre, and even intercepted the British plan to ambush French-dominated Rhode Island, creating the important French-American alliance between the two nations. Among these members were two unassumingly remarkable women. One was Anna Smith Strong, neighbour of Culper Ring communications expert Abraham Woodhull. She discovered a subtle yet clever method of communicating messages from Woodhull to his associate in Connecticut. Strong silently communicated these messages by hanging certain garments on a clothesline outside of her window. The colour of clothing would indicate different kinds of messages Woodhull wished to communicate, which could be viewed by his associate from a telescope atop a Connecticut base across the water. The other spectacular female member of the Culper Ring was only a teenager. Sarah or Sally Townsend was the younger sister of member Robert Townsend. She was only 17 when she began her spying career. Townsend may have been young, but she was quite attractive for her age. She managed to win the affections of British Lieutenant Colonel John Graves Simcoe. This was no ordinary soldier she had seduced, but the commanding officer of Britain's own American Rangers or intelligence group. She invited Simcoe to establish himself in her home in 1778 and used his affections for her to learn the secrets he kept inside of his own intelligence agency, which she would later pass on to her brother in the Culper Ring.
Let's jump across the pond and take a look at a more controversial spy of Britain and the impact he left on the Revolutionary War. John André came from a merchant-class French Protestant family in London, England. Having been sent to a private school in Geneva, Switzerland for most of his early life, André was a step ahead of his peers. He was as charming and well-mannered as he was charismatic, with a fine taste for the arts. Once his father died in 1769, André was expected to take over his business, but fate had other plans for him. During his first year running the family business, he had captured the affections of heartthrob Honora Sneyd, a wealthy poet with a shared appreciation of classic humanities. Though André worked hard to meet the expectations of her guardian, Honora found that she had grown tired of him and left to marry another man. With his dreams of love and upper-class membership crushed, André decided to pursue his dreams of serving in the military. He joined on March 4, 1771, and was immediately selected for special training in Germany. Once finished in 1774, André was sent to Canada to serve Great Britain as a lieutenant in the Royal English Fusiliers. When the war began in 1775, André was there to defend British Fort St. John's from the Continental Army, but his forces were defeated after nearly 2 months of battle. Little did he know this battle would change his life for better and for worse. On November 2, 1775, Andrew was taken as a prisoner of war and moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Prisoners of war during this period in time were not treated poorly. In fact, it seemed quite the opposite. Coincidentally, in his transport to Pennsylvania, he was able to dine in the colonial home of loyalist Mr. Hayes in New York and his brother-in-law Joshua Het Smith, who would later be responsible for the capture and execution of André later in his life. Because of his standing as an officer, he was spared from staying in prisoner barracks and was instead placed with a local family. He was quite the gentleman and easily charmed his hosts with his manners and intelligence, even offering their eldest son art lessons during his time there. He stayed in Lancaster for nearly a year until he was involved in a prisoner exchange at the end of 1776. Once he returned to the recently captured New York, he presented Commander-in-Chief William Howe a memoir he composed during his time in American lines. Howe was so impressed with his accounts and observations of the colonies that he promptly promoted André to a captain and recommended his work to General Charles Grey. André was made General Grey's aide and took part in many of his infamously brutal battles such as the Battle of Brandywine, the Paoli Massacre, and a few British raids in Massachusetts and New Jersey, most of which he recorded in his journal. During the winter occupation of Philadelphia in 1777 to 1778, André built up a reputation for himself as a charming, fun-loving soldier who took center stage in the entertainment of his militia, planning concerts, acting plays, and reading poetry. With Grey thoroughly pleased with André's endeavors, he swiftly promoted him to major and was assigned as a deputy general under Sir Henry Clinton, Britain's latest commander-in-chief. André was quick to form a friendship with Clinton despite his bitter disposition. Because of this bond, Clinton became confident in André's ability and assigned him the responsibility of coordinating British intelligence activities. André was thrilled and excitedly engaged in his new job, both maintaining British spy secrecy and learning, which American officers were most susceptible to British influence. André was delayed yet again by the winter in 1778, but eventually continued his work the following year. By May 10, 1779, André had struck gold in his military career. He received an offer from American General Benedict Arnold to surrender the fort at West Point, a key location in the Revolutionary War. John André sprung on the opportunity and thus began his negotiations with Arnold on the cost of such an important betrayal. The price fluctuated throughout the year, Andre still taking time to serve Clinton in a few assaults in Savannah, Georgia and Charleston, South Carolina. Arnold was even able to offer some valuable information in aid of Britain during this period of time. Though strictly advised not to disguise himself, Andre decided to wear an American uniform. He was safe with Smith until the last leg of the journey, when Smith left Andre to cover the last 15 miles in British territory by himself, confident in his safety. Andre never made it back. He was confronted by American freelancers dressed as British officers and searched. His incriminating documents were discovered, and he was promptly arrested for espionage. He was tried on September 29, 1780, and found guilty of his crime. Before he was scheduled to hang on October 2, Andre wrote a letter to George Washington, begging for a more honorable death by firing squad. He was denied, but instead allowed to wear his scarlet uniform on his death march. On a chill October afternoon in Tappan, New York, Andre was marched to the gallows and hung until dead. Though he did put on quite a grand sentimental show before he was executed. He waved to the audience before his execution and offered them words of comfort before expressing both bravery and dignity by putting the noose over his own neck and bringing 2 of his own silk handkerchiefs to cover his face and tie his hands. John Andre most certainly left a lasting legacy for future generations to observe.
Another famous spy figure of the Revolutionary War is one that completely slipped under the radar of detection because of her assumed role in her society. Anne Bates worked as a schoolteacher in Philadelphia when she decided to offer her services to Commander-in-Chief Sir Henry Clinton, sometime around 1778. Women of her time were considered inept, and soldiers supposed them to be completely incapable of understanding talk of war strategies or anything to do with battle. However, Bates proved this to be untrue. Her husband was both a soldier and gun repairman serving under General Clinton. She learned from her husband how to identify certain weaponry and could report on important information such as the number of cannons, men and supplies needed, and plans for upcoming battles. Bates would use this preconceived image to her advantage. By wandering into camp, disguised as a peddler, she would roam freely about camp, eavesdropping on conversations and counting both men and cannons. On one of her missions in White Plains, New York, she even overheard talk of continental advancement towards Long Island and plans of invasion towards British-controlled Rhode Island. Bates swiftly returned to British New York on August 19, 1778, to warn General Clinton of the French and American troop movements. Her information influenced Clinton's decision to reinforce defense in Rhode Island, forcing them to retreat from Newport, Rhode Island on August 31, 1778. Bates undertook a number of undercover missions for General Clinton until her retirement in 1780, and convinced the British government to pay her a small pension for her efforts. She may have been subtle, but her efforts played an important role in the protection of Rhode Island during the Revolution.
Though many tend to overlook lesser-known spies of the Revolutionary War, all of the people involved in this underground network played their part in a cause much greater than just themselves, risking death and shame upon their legacies. By acknowledging and observing only a few of these figures, I believe it is safe to conclude that the revolution most definitely would have ended up differently without their noble efforts.